So, I'm talking about detox today, and it's something that's very close to my heart because had I got the correct information, I think I could have avoided a lot of damage. And so, this is going to be my experience. This is not medical advice. This is just what I have experienced and what was true for me. And when I say detox, let's be clear, I'm not talking about doing a juice fast for a couple of days or having a colonic or whatever it is. We're talking about a medical detox done very slowly over a period of time, like years and years in some people's cases. Now, I think this information is good for people with chronic illness, and it really is about handling what has, with time, when it comes to these illnesses, very slowly, the organ capability will become more and more sluggish. So your liver and your kidneys and your lymphatics will not be working optimally. And so there will be a build-up. Obviously, at the same time, there are some people who come into these illnesses with previous, like acute exposures or just chronic long-term exposures, which are just cumulative, building up over time. And they are something that need to be handled as well. So, broadly speaking, if anyone has a chronic illness for a prolonged period of time, there probably will be some toxic exposures and toxic buildups. Now, if someone's wondering how much of an issue they have and they don't really want to go through the really expensive, quite scary functional medicine testing, I think a really quite affordable alternative would be to try and get a Perrin technique session. Quite simply, that is a form of quite intense lymphatic massage, which is really quite aggressively draining the cerebral spinal fluid. If you haven't got a Perrin practitioner near you, they are osteopaths by trade. You can always just go for a normal lymphatic massage and ask for it to be quite intense. And from that moment on, you'll immediately either have very strong reactions going on in your body. Maybe you'll have a crash, whatever the situation is, or maybe you won't. And in that case, you'll know that okay, things actually are okay. There's no headache, there's no full-on crash, whatever it's going to be. This is manageable. So as I kind of present this information, I really want whoever ends up listening to it not to become too fearful, because actually what I'm about to say is quite, fearful material. It's something that is just a part of modern day life now, and we have to come to terms with it, and we have to not be ignorant of it, but we also have to not pretend that it's not happening and it's not real, because it's having catastrophic effects on just normal people's health, and they don't really even realize. And so you have to flip it around and say, okay, this is actually a good opportunity to get ahead of the game, and let's put some practices in place which are going to serve us in the long run, far after we've recovered. So to quickly just give a backstory of what went wrong with my detox journey, and so not for you to make the same mistakes, was I was given a lot of fear by doctors who work quite uniquely in the field in my country within this sort of detox realm. They all have clients who were military people who got toxic exposures, factory workers, really, and just normal people as well. But it's, a place which really specialized in toxicity. And I was told really quite terrifying things about the levels within my own system, which now I understand so much more about the nervous system and the limbic brain. You're looking for safety and you're given the most terrifying news. And I was not someone who was ignorant of all the modern introductions of all these chemicals. I was someone who was quite up to date with understanding what had happened over the last 70 years in modern agriculture and in industry. And so it really was something that I took very seriously and really affected my nervous system upon hearing and seeing the results. And so that's step one, is to not just fall into really, intense levels of fear. And what I love about that place is that they're taking people with these conditions seriously. But what in hindsight, I really find it quite sad that they did not explain to me, or, they don't have at their disposal the knowledge about how we have to work with the nervous system and the limbic brain over time to engage in neuroplasticity and rewire these really crazy responses, and that to engage in a really intense detox protocol when your body is deeply depleted in this terrible sort of chronic illness, somewhere between fight or flight and freeze. The fact that then you would go, oh yeah, we're going to do this really intense detox protocol while you're barely able to to walk, it's absolute madness. And I have had people come to me, and on one hand, it's sort of great that there are PhD level scientists who are kind of coming together with a protocol for people and recognizing that, a cellular toxic detox is part of this and is needed, but they're having no idea of how to apply it. And certainly you do not want to be telling anyone who's severe or moderate that they need to get on an intense detox chelation therapy, anything like that, because their bodies literally cannot handle any more stress. And that goes for emotional stress, chemical stress, viral stress, whatever it is. And so sadly, I wasn't really aware of that. You have a doctor who tells you to do a protocol and you do it. And yeah, I think I'll never know for sure, but it's a really, really damaging thing to enter a protocol when you're on a downward spiral already physically, and getting weaker and weaker, and just pushing, your organs, your system harder and harder to detox this stuff. And so very quickly I'll describe something that was called the Dr. Hubbard protocol, and then it was Dr. U, and it was used really successfully with some of the firefighters and first responders of 9/11. And it very simply involves taking high doses of niacin, which is vitamin B3, which encourages vasodilation, as well as sort of mobilizes the fat cells where a lot of the toxins are stored. And so then everything's coming into the bloodstream, so it then can be, into the sauna you go, and you can sweat out these fat soluble toxins. These firefighters and first responders were, doing this about 2 hours a day sometimes. And then, so essential to have massive amounts of hydration and remineralize when you're doing something like this. And then obviously healthy diet and exercise alongside. And I mean, this was a while back, but it's widely accepted that, many firefighters, they're saying on one record, 700 firefighters' lives were saved because of these protocols, and getting out all that really terrible shit that they had to sort of breathe in, the heavy metals, the industrial chemicals, which they were exposed to during 9/11. And so I went on that protocol, flushing niacin and into a sauna. But where we would differ as a patient, someone who is still functioning, who's had a massive acute toxic exposure, but is presenting able to walk, able to function okay, to someone who is, at that point, maybe sort of borderline bedbound, housebound. And so you're going to expect that person's body to react so differently. One area which is common with people with high toxic exposures and chronic illness, is actually there's, due to nervous system dysregulation, there's an inability to sweat. And so you want to make sure that you're in a really strong sauna, which you're actually going to be able to get a sweat going, or else you're going to be mobilizing all this stuff and it's going to have nowhere to go. And so that was something that I came up against, obviously not able to travel to a sauna. I bought one of those sauna blankets, which is infrared. Infrared is always sold as being preferable because it goes deeper into the skin and mobilizes at a lower level, rather than just a pure sort of dry heat sauna, which is dealing with, the nearer the top of the skin. And so I was having high doses of niacin going into this infrared sauna blanket, not being able to break sweat because actually the temperature of those things wasn't high enough to start with, and having an inability to sweat due to high toxic load. I mean, so it's just an absolute disaster. So you're mobilizing so much stuff, and stuff at a sort of intracellular level, and then it's in the bloodstream and it's got nowhere to go. And so then it's a massive, toxic burden on your organs, which are already underperforming. And so really quite obviously you're going to have trouble. And then I'll go on to certain supplements later, because I need to describe the difference in binders and the type of binder you need to be using, because that again can be, adding to your toxic burden. So just to backtrack a little bit, I want to talk about toxic exposures in general, and how so often you'll hear people in the medical establishment saying, you don't need to detox, your body is designed to detox for you. And that's a very lovely idea, and certainly true in a pre-industrial age, but it's just not something that really can hold up with today's modern science. We have, well, in America, these are American figures, 80,000 chemicals in our environment, and only about 100 of them are even studied by any sort of realm of the imagination. We have so much corruption and people sticking their head in the sand, with diseases skyrocketing. It's little wonder when we have, tens of thousands of chemicals which are completely unregulated, just allowed out into our everyday life through our food, through our furniture, through our clothes, through our water. Tragically now, a baby still in the womb is found to have about 200 of these chemicals in their blood, even before they're born. So much of what's happened to us, in a world post World War II, we had a new farming system introduced. Instead of replenishing the soils in the old-fashioned way, we had now the introduction of synthetic fertilizers, and with that comes a lot of cadmium and the removal completely of sort of trace minerals which are needed at such a basic level for us to have optimal health. We had the arrival of organophosphates, pesticides, which are literally neurological poisons, and they were reimagined post-World War II and synthesized by the Germans as a nerve agent. We know these chemicals cause massive disruption to the endocrine system and damage our DNA, and they do. Honestly, the list would be so long of what they truly do. But also, obviously, I want to sort of keep the fear level low, but I do think this information is really valuable for your future. But I think pesticides in general, I think you can say till the cows come home, they cause cancers. People sort of seem to just ignore that. I think quite a interesting angle to push is actually that pesticides stimulate enzymes that actually convert your calories into fat. And so therefore, toxins are fat soluble, the body's fat stores them, and then it becomes a sort of weight loss loop where it becomes very hard to lose weight, very hard to detox as well, and painful. But you are getting exposed to pesticides and it's becoming fat, it's getting stored in the fat, and it's becoming harder to shift that because then you're releasing into your bloodstream again and creating more fat, like a loop. And so it's, just really tricky to explain to people how detrimental to your health these chemicals are. So alongside, as I've explained, messing with the enzymes, it can be anything. It can interrupt neurons and brain function. It can mess with your hormones, block insulin receptors, mess and displace minerals. And that's a really big one on a gentle detox, is making sure you always are just replenishing your minerals again and again. As I mentioned, I've always been interested in organic farming and not using pesticides and finding alternatives. And I think it's very ironic that I end up with such high exposures, but you can't control the people around you and your environment beyond like your house and your garden. And so you have to learn to slightly let go. Obviously, it's not great, but an avoidance is the best strategy. But then again, you can't just live your life locked up. You have to go out into the world. When it comes directly to things like ME, what I find very interesting is the sort of Gulf War syndrome crossover. So much of that, the organophosphates and the burn pits, all those chemicals completely frying those poor people's nervous systems. And the symptoms of something like severe ME and Gulf War syndrome are really, there's no difference. Interestingly enough as well, there was about 25 years ago a big uproar in Scotland where hundreds of Scottish farmers all were demanding action and support for the terrible psychological and physical illnesses that they got from having to use organophosphate in sheep dip. And they called it sheep dipping sickness, but it was ME. And in 1997, 60 farmers in the Western Isles got ME. And so for anyone that doesn't know the Western Isles, we're talking a really tiny population. And so for 60 farmers from those islands to get ME is really extraordinary and so telling of how damaging these pesticides are on our nervous system. Another British story in the south of England, so completely opposite direction, the village of Lamberhurst, I think it is, and that's a very prolific fruit growing area, and vegetables like potatoes and fruits often have the highest pesticide spraying itinerary. So that's something to watch out for. There were 38 incidents of chronic illness like ME and fibro in one village, and in fact, one family across all ages got ME. And so if you are strong enough, I really do recommend using a sauna if that's something that you can do and you're at a mild stage of illness where you're on an upward trajectory. You have an understanding of your nervous system and regulation tools. I think sauna is a wonderful asset to any recovery. My second recommendation are binders. And binders are supplements. And I'm not one to massively think you need to spend so much on supplements to recover, but I do think binders, if you think you have a significant toxic issue, you need to be taking GI binders. And so very simply, I'll try and make this as kind of clear as possible. There are 3 different types of binders, and you really need to be careful when you're purchasing something. I heard someone talk to me the other day about, there are these nano sprays you can use and nano zeolite sprays, and they are so potent. And if you have someone with high mercury or whatever it is, and you go spraying this stuff, literally spray into the mouth, and zeolite is a binder. Quite literally, that just means that it has like a negative charge and it's binding to a positive toxin. I don't really understand the science of that. but it's going into the body. And these, as I'm saying, these sprays, and they're potentially crossing the blood-brain barrier and mobilizing whatever, toxic crap you have going on. And it can be quite a sort of rough experience, quite a dangerous thing to do. And so that's why I think everyone should always just start with a GI binder. And so that really simply means it's only binding to what it finds in the gastrointestinal tract. And so it's there after whatever you've eaten or whatever's being processed comes out of the liver and the gallbladder, and it's the binder sitting in your gut, swallowed it, it's a supplement, and it's binding to whatever's there and taking it out via your stool. And so that is a kind of gentle introduction to detox. If you don't have a binder there, whatever you've got going on will enter the small intestine and then just get reabsorbed, and the cycle will go on. Now, the next level of binder is called a blood or tissue binder, and so that means it is traveling. I mean, this is at a sort of tiny particle level into the blood, into your tissue, and binding, literally attaching, collecting whatever toxins it finds, and then trying to carry it out. And that's like the next level. The nanozeolites I mentioned are, they're intracellular and blood and tissue binders. They're going to get things like mold, heavy metals, viruses, bacteria, radioactive material. So just to give you an idea of how strong we're talking here, that, tests have been done on these things. And after taking nanozeolites, they could be in a pill form, or as I said, in a spray form, the levels of mercury and lead in just 12 hours go up 1,000%. And I haven't got the reference for that, but that's just a broad idea of how powerful a release. So just as I was talking about the sauna, you don't want to be encouraging that sort of release into your bloodstream to be processed when you're not ready, when your organs aren't being supported correctly. You need to go really slow. And that's like why I say GI binder, because you're literally getting what would already be looping around. For those of you in the sort of supplement world, Cellcore is the brand, which they're strong, and you want to be careful. Once again, I was put on intense protocols by functional medicine practitioners who just did not understand the condition, and they were going, yeah, these are great for people wanting to get rid of, as I just said, mold, heavy metals, pathogenic bacteria. And we have intracellular binders, and that's sort of next level. That really is crossing blood-brain barrier, going into a cell, sort of forcing a detox of that cell. And once again, as I mentioned, Cellcore, alpha lipoic acid. You want to be really careful with these things. And I think, as I mentioned, some practitioners just don't underestimate, they really just don't understand the level of burden already on our organs and our systems and how poor they're functioning. And so this idea is just madness, and something that really happened to me was just being pushed at a level via the sauna, via the supplement regime, to detox, and this flood of toxins into my body, into my bloodstream. As I mentioned, what happens then? Fat. These toxins stimulate this enzyme, and your body just creates fat cells to store it. And it's, pretty radical what can happen to your body. So yeah, that's my warning about zeolites. Make sure it's not a nanozeolite unless you're ready and you think your body can handle that intense level of detox. I think it's also quite obvious that you need to get decent water. And as I mentioned, pesticides disrupt the minerals in your body. And so you need to be remineralizing the whole time, and you need to be drinking a lot of water, and you need to have a good filter. And then you need to be having fiber to help carry all of this stuff out and support the detox protocols. And you have to go really slow, and sometimes it is uncomfortable. I mean, obviously, ideally, there'd be organic food in your detox protocol, and just a general sensible avoidance of highly toxic fabrics, beauty products, anything sprayed with like a fire retardant. And as I end, obviously I've just given a massive dose of fear to anyone listening about these really insidious chemicals which are everywhere. Ultimately, I know of people who have recovered in the most toxic of environments. I'm myself back in an environment I can't control. I'm exposed to pesticides every day. It's just part of the process, and learning to deal with the fear is all part of it. Managing your own fear literally will be boosting your detox capabilities. And so that's a really important thing to remember, as it's all stress: chemical stress, emotional stress, toxic stress. So I hope that is useful, and it's a very simple message: not to make the same mistakes that I did.